What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for MLB Saturday, August 14th.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top DFS picks for today's MLB slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, we have a 9-game slate tonight, so let's take a look at the pitcher position. I'm going to save a little bit of salary here. I like Luis Garcia with a 23% pitching advantage over a low salary batting team, the Los Angeles Angels. Luis Garcia, he's pitching 23% better versus righties. He pitches his best ball versus righties by far, and he's only giving up a .387 OPS versus righties. He's facing 7 righties here tonight. On top of that, the Angels have only hit 4 of his last 21 pitches. That's a 190 batting average. And Luis Garcia, he's only 7,900 FanDuel salary. He's 2,000 more on DraftKings. So I love that FanDuel price. He's projected at 24.1 fantasy points here tonight, but I think he can score 30 fantasy points or more in this one. He has an ERA of 3.29. Record is 8-6 on the season, pitching an average of 84 pitches per game, averaging 32 fantasy points per game. He scored 52, 20, and 26 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Luis Garcia as a value play at pitcher here versus the Los Angeles Angels. Okay, let's take a look at the catcher first base position. I like Salvador Perez with a 40% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Jon Lester. Salvador Perez is batting 14% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a 1.004 OPS versus lefties. And Jon Lester, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 26% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .904 OPS versus righties. Salvador Perez is 3 for 10, batting 300 with a .800 OPS versus Lester. He's 3,400 FanDuel salary, 1,400 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 9, 4, and 44 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And I like this pick because Vegas thinks there's going to be 10 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Salvador Perez here versus Jon Lester. I also like Buster Posey with a 13% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Kyle Freeland. Buster Posey is batting 14% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a 1.081 OPS versus lefties, and Kyle Freeland is giving up a .799 OPS versus righties. Buster Posey is 6 for 21, batting a 286 batting average and a .872 OPS versus Freeland. He's 3,300 FanDuel salary. He's only 600 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season, and he's been on fire, scoring 9, 22, and 37 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Buster Posey here versus Kyle Freeland. Okay, let's take a look at the second base position. I like Marcus Semien with a 34% batting advantage over Yusei Kikuchi. Marcus Semien is batting 8% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .818 OPS versus lefties. And Yusei Kikuchi, he throws 26% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .732 OPS versus righties. Marcus Semien is 6 for 21 with a .286 batting average and a .762 OPS versus Kikuchi. He's 3,800 FanDuel salary. He's 1,100 more on DraftKings. Projected at 10.9 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 13 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 9, and 12 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Marcus Semien here versus Yusei Kikuchi. I also like Whit Merrifield with a 34% batting advantage over that low salary pitcher, John Lester. Whit Merrifield bats 7% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .778 OPS versus lefties. And John Lester, we know, throws his worst ball versus righty batters, 26% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .904 OPS versus righties. Whit Merrifield is 1 for 2 with a 1.167 OPS versus Lester. He's 3,600 FanDuel salary, and he's the same price on DraftKings. Projected at 10.9 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 18, and 21 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 10 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Whit Merrifield here versus John Lester. Okay, now here's a value play for you. I like Abraham Toro with a 26% batting advantage over Hyun-Jin Ryu. Abraham Toro bats 14% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .724 OPS versus lefties. And Hyun-Jin Ryu, he throws his worst ball versus switch hitters, 13% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .763 OPS versus switch hitters. Now there's no at-bats versus Ryu yet, but I like this pick because Abraham Toro is only 2,700 FanDuel salary. He's 700 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 3, and 12 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Abraham Toro as a value play here versus Hyun-Jin Ryu. Okay, let's take a look at the third base position. I like Josh Donaldson with a 24% batting advantage over Michael Wacha. Josh Donaldson is batting 12% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .836 OPS versus righties. And Michael Wacha, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 12% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .978 OPS versus righties. Josh Donaldson is 1 for 2 with a 1.667 OPS versus Wacha. He's 3,000 FanDuel salary, only 600 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.7 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 6, and 7 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Josh Donaldson here versus Michael Wacha.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Now, here's another value play for you. I like Joey Wendell with a 29% batting advantage over Kenta Maeda. Joey Wendell is batting 25% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .811 OPS versus righties. And Kenta Maeda is giving up a .642 OPS versus lefties. There's no at-bats versus Maeda yet, but Joey Wendell is only 2,400 FanDuel salary. Now he's 1,500 more on DraftKings, so I love that FanDuel price. And he's projected at 12.3 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 10, 12, and 10 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Joey Wendell here versus Kenta Maeda. Okay, let's take a look at the shortstop position. Here's another value play for you. I like Paul DeJong with a 7% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Brad Keller. Paul DeJong is batting 25% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .701 OPS versus righties, and Brad Keller is giving up a .654 OPS versus righties. But I like this pick because Paul DeJong is 3 for 8, batting a .375 batting average and a .955 OPS versus Keller. And he's only $2,600 FanDuel salary, and he's $800 more on DraftKings, projected at 8.7 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 4, 22, and 19 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 10 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Paul DeJong here versus Brad Keller. Okay, moving on to the outfield position. Couple of studs that are in really good spots here tonight. I like Starling Marte with a 16% batting advantage over Jordan Lyles. Starling Marte bats 7% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .834 OPS versus righties. And Jordan Lyles, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters. 9% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .895 OPS versus righties. Now, Starling Marte is 5 for 16, batting a .312 batting average and a .701 OPS versus Lyles. He's $4,400 FanDuel salary. He's $1,600 more on DraftKings, projected at 13.7 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 14 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 7, 23, and 15 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Starling Marte here versus Jordan Lyles. I also like George Springer with a 24% batting advantage over Yusei Kikuchi. George Springer is batting a .917 OPS versus lefty pitchers, and Yusei Kikuchi throws 26% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .732 OPS versus righties. Now I like this pick because George Springer is 7 for 14, batting .500 with a 1.143 OPS versus Kikuchi. He's $4,300 FanDuel salary. He's $1,000 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 14 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 0, and 44 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like George Springer here versus Yusei Kikuchi. Now, Eloy Jimenez and Chris Bryant, those guys are also in good spots here tonight. But if you want to save a little bit of salary with a guy that's in a great spot, take a look at Michael Brantley with a 66% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Jamie Barrea. Michael Brantley is batting 32% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .944 OPS versus righties. And Jamie Barrea, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 33% worse than his pitch to righties, giving up a .820 OPS versus lefties. Now, the only negative thing about this pick, or the only thing I don't like, is that Michael Brantley is only 1 for 10 with a .450 OPS versus Barria, but the splits are fantastic, and Michael Brantley is only $3,000 FanDuel salary and only $100 more on DraftKings. Projected at 10.9 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 15, and 13 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Michael Brantley here versus Jamie Barria. Okay, now here's a value play. I like Austin Slater with a 37% batting advantage over the low-salary pitcher Kyle Freeland. Austin Slater is batting 38% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .987 OPS versus lefties. Kyle Freeland is giving up a .799 OPS versus righties. The reason I like this pick is because Austin Slater is 6 for 18, batting a .333 batting average and a .929 OPS versus Freeland, and he's only $2,500 FanDuel salary and the same price on DraftKings. So I like that price on both sites, and he's projected at 13.7 fantasy points here tonight. Now he's only averaging 6 fantasy points per game on the season, but he did score 21 fantasy points last game. So I like Austin Slater as a value play in a great spot here versus Kyle Freeland.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.